Benin Road. Speed is violence. Power is violence. Weight, violence. The butterfly seeks safety in lightness, in weightlessness, undulated flight, but at a crossroad where melted lights from old trees fall on a brand new highway or separate errands collide, I come power packed for two, and the gentle butterfly offers itself in bright yellow sacrifice upon my hard silicon shield. A history of ethnic tension and resentment. I have written in my small book entitled The Trouble with Nigeria that Nigerians will probably achieve consensus on no other matter than their common resentment of the Igbo. The origin of the national resentment of the Igbo is as old as Nigeria and quite as complicated, but it can be summarized thus: the Igbo culture, being receptive to change, individualistic, and highly competitive, gave the Igbo man an unquestioned advantage over his compatriots in securing credentials for advancement in Nigerian colonial society. Unlike the House of Fulani, he was unhindered by a wary religion, and unlike the Yoruba, he was unhampered by traditional hierarchies. This kind of creature, fearing no god or man, was custom made to grasp the opportunities, such as they were, of the white man's dispensations, and the Igbo did so with both hands. Although the Yoruba had a huge historical and geographical head start, the Igbo wiped out their handicap in one fantastic burst of energy in the 20 years between 1930 and 1950. Had the Igbo been a minor ethnic group of a few hundred thousand, their menace might have been easily and quietly contained, but their members ran in the millions. As in J.P. Clark's fine image of an ant filing out of the wood, the Igbo moved out of their forest homes, scattered, and virtually seized the floor. Paul Amber explains. With unparalleled rapidity, the Igbo advanced fastest in the shortest period of time of all Nigerians' ethnic groups. Like the Jews, to whom they have frequently been likened, they progressed despite being a minority in the country, filling the ranks of the nation's educated, prosperous upper classes. It was not long before the educational and economic progress of the Igbos led to their becoming the major source of administrators, managers, technicians, and civil servants for the country, occupying senior positions out of proportion to their numbers. Particularly with respect to the federal public service and the government statutory corporations. This led to accusations of an Igbo monopoly of essential services to the exclusion of other ethnic groups. The rise of the Igbo in Nigerian affairs was due to the self-confidence engendered by their open society and their belief that one man is as good as another, that no condition is permanent. It was not due, as non-Igbo observers have imagined, to tribal mutual aid societies. The Igbo Town Union that has often been written about was in reality an extension of the Igbo individualistic ethic. The Igbo towns competed among themselves for certain kinds of social achievement, like the building of schools, churches, markets, post offices, pipe-borne water projects, roads, etc. They did not consign themselves with pan-Igbo unity, nor were they geared to securing an advantage over non-Igbo Nigerians. The Igbo have no compelling traditional loyalty beyond town or village. There were a number of other factors that spurred the Igbos to educational, economic, and political success. The population density in Igbo land created a land hunger, a pressure on their low fertility, laterite-laden soil for cultivation, housing, and other purposes, factors that led ultimately to migration to other parts of the nation. In northern Nigeria, there were less than 3,000 Igbos in 1921. By 1931, the number had risen to nearly 12,000, and by 1952 to over 130,000. The coastal branches of the Yoruba nation had some of the earliest contacts with the European missionaries and explorers as a consequence of their proximity to the shoreline and their own dedication to learning. They led the entire nation in educational attainment from the late 19th to the early 20th century. By the time the Church Mission Society and a number of Roman Catholic orders had crossed the Niger River and entered Igbo land, there had been an explosion in the numbers of Igbo students enrolled in school. The increase was so exponential in such a short time that within 3 short decades, the Igbos had closed the gap and quickly moved ahead as the group with the highest literacy rate, the highest standard of living, and the greatest proportion of citizens with post-secondary education in Nigeria. The Igbo, for the most part, at least until recently, respected the education that the colonizers had brought with them. There was not only individual interest in the white man's knowledge, but family, community, and regional interest. It would not surprise an observer that the Igbos absorbed Western education as readily as they responded to urbanization. I will be the first to concede that the Igbo as a group is not without its flaws. Its success can and did carry deadly penalties. The dangers of hubris, overweening pride, and thoughtlessness, which invite envy and hatred, or even worse, that can obsess the mind with material success and dispose it to all kinds of crude showiness. There is no doubt at all that there is a strand in contemporary Igbo behavior that can offend by its noisy exhibitionism and disregard for humility and quietness. Having acknowledged these facts, any observer can clearly see how the competitive individualism and the adventurous spirit of the Igbo could have been harnessed by committed leaders for the modernization and development of Nigeria. Nigeria's pathetic attempt to crush these idiosyncrasies rather than celebrate them is one of the fundamental reasons the country has not developed as it should and has emerged as a laughingstock. The ploy in the Nigerian context was simple and crude. Get the achievers out and replace them with less qualified individuals from the desired ethnic background so as to gain access to the resources of the state. This bizarre government strategy transformed the federal civil service, corporations, and universities into centers for ethnic bigotry and petty squabbles. It was in this toxic environment that Professor Enin Joko, the Igbo, who was vice chancellor of the University of Lagos, was forced out of office. An exasperated Kenneth Onwokadike, an ethnic Igbo and the vice chancellor of the University of Ibadan, facing similar bouts of tribal small-mindedness, famously lamented during this crisis that intellectuals were the worst peddlers of tribalism. One of the first signs I saw of an Igbo backlash came in the form of a 1966 publication from northern Nigeria called The Nigerian Situation, Facts and Background. In it, the Igbo were cast as an assertive group that unfairly dominated almost every sector of Nigerian society. No mention was made of the culture of educational excellence imbibed from the British that pervaded Igbo society and schools at the time. Special attention instead was paid to the manpower distribution within the public services, where 45% of the managers were Igbo, and it is threatening to reach 60% by 1968. Moreover, regrettably though, the North's future contribution was credited with only 10% of the existing post. Of particular dismay to the authors of the report were the situations in the Nigerian Railway Corporation, in which over half of the posts were occupied by Igbos, the Nigerian Port Authority, and the Nigerian Foreign Service, in which over 70% of the posts were held by Igbos. Probably the pettiest of the accusation was the lamentation over the academic success of Easterners who graduated in larger numbers in the 1965-66 academic year than their counterparts from the West, Midwest, and North. By the time the government of the Western region also published a white paper outlining the dominance of the ethnic Igbo in key government positions in the Nigerian Railway Corporation and the Nigerian Ports Authority, the situation for ethnic Igbos working in Western Nigeria in particular, but all over Nigeria in general, had become untenable. These government-sanctioned environments of hate and resentment created by self-serving politicians resulted in government-supervised persecutions, terminations, and dismissal of Nigerian citizens based on their ethnicity. In most other nations, the success of an ethnic group as industrious as the Igbo would stimulate healthy competition and a renaissance of learning and achievement. In Nigeria, it bred deep resentment and both subtle and overt attempts to dismantle the structures in place for meritocracy in favor of mediocrity under the cloak of a need for federal character, a morally bankrupt and deeply corrupt Nigerian form of the far more successful affirmative action in the United States. The denial of merit is a form of social injustice that can hurt not only the individuals directly concerned but ultimately the entire society. The motive for the original denial may be tribal discrimination, but it may also come from sexism, from political, religious, or some other partisan consideration, or from corruption and bribery. It is unnecessary to examine these various motives separately. It is sufficient to state that whenever merit is set aside by prejudice of whatever origin, individual citizens as well as the nation itself are victimized.